Okay.
And we are live.
Okay.
There aren't any attendees in the room. Oh, now there's an attendee. So welcome.
Okay, thank you. And welcome to our attendee. And welcome to the Library Commission's February 22nd meeting. This is a teleconference meeting with Library Commission members, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing in this federal, state, and local emergency. I would like to introduce staff and Library Commission members present. Mayrin Bunyagij is here. Alan Cohen is here. David Earhart is here. And I'm Katie Hadrovich. Also, I'd like to take this moment to announce that Commissioner Yen Tran has actually resigned from the Library Commission, as my understanding is she has moved out of the city of Menlo Park, and so therefore is no longer qualified to serve on this commission. We are still expecting and waiting for Commissioner Sukanya Guha and Kristen Leap to join the meeting, and as they join, I will make note of their arrival. Staff present include Sean Reinhart, the Director of Library and Community Services, and Nick Shegda, Assistant Library Services Director. Nick is also the staff liaison for the Library Commission. Nick, would you please provide instructions to the Library Commission and members of the public on how the meeting will proceed?
Sure. So this is familiar to all of you, but I'll say it anyway. It's a teleconference meeting, so please keep your cameras on if you can, and your microphones off until you're recognized by the chair. That's for the commission. For members of the public in attendance, the chair will call for public comment at various times throughout the meeting. At that point, if you have a public comment to make, please engage that either the raised hand function or type a note or question in the chat box. I monitor the chat window. The commissioners do not monitor the chat window and won't be engaging with the public through the chat function. Members of the commission, please wait to be called on or recognized by the chair, then unmute yourself and speak. I think that probably covers all the rules. If I've left anything out, let me know.
Thank you. At every special meeting of the commission, members of the public have the right to directly address the commission on any item listed on the agenda at the time designated by the chair. And we are doing a special commission meeting tonight because it was a holiday last week. Each speaker may address the Library Commission once under public comment for each item for a limit of 3 minutes. Please clearly state your name and address or political jurisdiction in which you live. Okay, so did we want to do public comments right now to see if there's a public comment on anything that's not on the agenda?
At special meetings, there isn't the non-agenda public comment. There's just public comment on the specific items.
Sorry, I know that's exactly what I just said, but we only have one person here, so you know, it's not a big deal. Okay. Under regular business, the Library Commission considers recommendations from city staff on policy matters of administrative actions that require Library Commission approval. And I'll just make note that Commissioner Sukanya Guha has just arrived. Welcome to the meeting. Glad to have you here.
Hi, thanks.
Okay, the first item on our agenda, item C1, is to approve the minutes from the January 25th Library Commission meeting. Any clarifying questions from the commission before taking public comment on this item? All right, Nick, would you see if we have any public comments on this item?
I will. If any member of the public would like to make a comment, you can use that raise hand feature, and then we will recognize you and unmute you.
Okay.
And I don't see any comment.
Okay, then I'll open for Library Commission discussion. Has everyone read the library minutes? Are there any objections, alterations to them? Okay, if not, I think we need a motion to approve and a second for that stated motion. Okay.
I'm happy to second it if you've taken a motion already.
All right, Nick, I'm seeing both Mayrin and Sukanya raise their hands, so I'll take that as a first and a second with Alan also endorsing it. And I think you have to take a roll call on that stated motion.
I do. So the motion is to approve the minutes from the January 25th Library Commission meeting. Motion made by Commissioner Guha and seconded by Commissioner Bunyagij. Vice Chair Earhart, how do you vote? I think you said approve. There we go. Commissioner Cohen, how do you vote? A thumbs up is a good. Chair Hadrovich, how do you vote?
I approve.
And we will assume, since Commissioners Bunyagij and Guha motioned and seconded, that they approve, and the motion passes unanimously.
Perfect, thank you. All right, item C2 is the discussion, rebuilding library and community services for post-COVID operations. That was a staff report 21-008 LC. Nick, my understanding is you're going to make a brief verbal presentation on that report.
Actually, Madam Chair, I actually do have a few slides to help illustrate.
Oh, great.
The verbal presentation. So if I may, I'll just run through them really quickly just to kind of give everyone an overview.
Of course, that would be awesome. Thank you. Just following the script, Sean. So I'm glad to have
no
you
problem.
participate.
A little bit of an audible to get these slides out here in front of you.
Yeah,
so
wonderful.
Get a little more
Thank
visual. Great.
Do you need the share powers, or do you have them already, Sean?
I do need them if I don't already have them. It kind of looks like I do.
Well, I made
so you all should be looking at a screen that says reimagine, rebuild, reactivate. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. I don't think these were part of the report that we saw either. Am I right?
No, though the information is consistent with what's in the staff report. And so we can attach these slides to the minutes afterwards, but it's really just to kind of help illustrate and start the conversation.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, so, the task before us is to rebuild library and community services for a post-COVID world. There's been quite a bit of change in the past year, as you can imagine, and we're looking ahead to a year of even more change as we rebuild the department services, reactivate them for especially facilities that are closed, and along the way have to reimagine things a little bit since the world has changed. So let's just see if I can make this slideshow progress. So just briefly, where we've been is a year of unprecedented change. The COVID-19 pandemic completely turned our world upside down. It's been almost a year since all the facilities in the city, the public facilities anyway, have been closed with just some limited services being provided. Also, a pretty substantial economic downturn took place, resulting in 17% operating budget reductions basically across the board, including in the Library and Community Services Department. And that resulted in numerous staff positions being eliminated, budget slashed, greatly just sort of resetting the baseline of just what our resources and capacity are. And so that's kind of where we are. Our departments did merge in June of last year. One thing that we really have going for us, though, is an incredible dedicated staff. Could not be happier to work with these folks. They've just done an incredible job stepping up under the most dire of crises that I think we've ever really had to face for such an extended period of time, and still getting out there and creatively and safely delivering services, whether it's library curbside pickup or senior meal delivery or our preschool childcare programs, which are operating under COVID restrictions. So that's kind of where we are, and a newly forged team kind of forged in the fires of all these crises. Where we're going is toward reopening, reactivating, reimagining, rebuilding, we hope by the end of this calendar year, as the vaccine continues to roll out and as cases continue to decline, and we hope that those trends continue so that we are able to kind of sort of resume the new normal. So that's kind of where we're going. And the The project for rebuilding the department really does entail quite a number of moving parts, and ultimately it all kind of comes down to the direction and authorization of the city council for the operating budget in particular, which is kind of the primary document that sort of sets forth what resources are available for departments. So just quickly, we're kind of in the second phase of the overall process. The first phase, as you know, we just completed in January, which was updating the department's strategic plan, just to give us that kind of 10,000-foot operating roadmap with the understanding that that's a living document and can be updated. We're currently in the rebuilding the department planning, conceived to happen between now and June, which is when budget adoption will occur by the city council. And then we're cautiously optimistic that phased in reactivation of various services can commence in the summer with the new fiscal year, and hopefully cases continuing to decline, the ability for facilities to open up safely, kind of coming to reality as we've long hoped for. And to do that over a period of about 6 months, encompassing roughly the beginning of next calendar year. Evaluating and refining what we've done in the first half of the next year in 2022, then moving into really planning for the operations of the new Menlo Park Community Campus. So commencing around summer of 2022 through the end of that calendar year, and then making the preparations to actually start operations of the Menlo Park Community Campus, which is projected to open potentially as early as March of 2023. All these things are of a piece, so the pretty major components of our sort of operational planning at this point. So just that's a sense of the phases. And there's a little more specific timeline in this being a library commission. Thought I'd share a favorite line from a poem. How did it get so late, so soon? It's amazing how quickly a year has gone by and how quickly that 2 years outlook that I just described will fly by. So staying on top of the milestones is really important. So kind of where we are right now in 2021 in the first quarter, January to March, we completed the strategic plan update. We did get some really excellent clear direction from the city council about the enterprise technology platform and library consortium membership, which is later on the agenda tonight. They did opt to allow an automatic Aquatis contract extension to occur, but that topic will be revisited within the next year or two. This Tuesday is an update to the city's cost recovery policy. This primarily relates for library and community services to user fees for recreation services, facility rentals, and some other things like that. And there will be some council study sessions on the topic of rebuilding library and community services, the first taking place March 9th, and now tentatively scheduled a second pass at it March 23rd. And of course, discussions among the commissions, the Library Commission and Parks and Recreation Commission. And then kind of at the tail end of this quarter is when the city's budget process for the new fiscal year starting in July really kicks into high gear. As we look ahead to the second quarter, really focusing in on diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility in all of our operational planning. This also is an effort that I believe is really getting underway citywide, but in particular as it relates to our department, how do we make sure that we are emphasizing and practicing those principles as we move toward operations? And then we will get into some more very specific program delivery assessments based on the direction that we received from council in the previous quarter and input from the commissions, specifically about the gymnastics programs, the various recreation programs, childcare, the library. And then the Menlo Park Community Campus interim services encompass primarily the senior center, the youth center, and the recreation services at the Onetta Harris Center while the new building's being constructed, because the old campus has to be torn down, and that is expected to begin in this summer, as you may recall. So the plan for those interim services, just finalizing that. And then, of course, the budget would be adopted in June. And then another just look ahead to the second part of this year, COVID permitting, will be able to allow some public access into facilities like the library at some point in the summer. So that would be implementing the service adaptation plan or the reactivation plan. We anticipate there will still be some hybrid of on-site services, but also having a remote component. So for example, an in-person meeting of the library commission or an event might still have a video conferencing component so people can attend virtually during this phase. We're looking at focusing on the lower risk activities beginning first, ones that can still have social distancing between folks and masks, and just kind of starting small with which facilities we open or to what extent we open them, and still having some 100% remote options in some cases. Again, like meetings makes kind of some sense to maybe keep those 100% remote for a while. And then we'll be looking at our strategic plan, do a 6-month review. It's a living document. It's certainly going to change as we develop the reactivation plans, just kind of making sure that we're staying on top of that, it stays fresh and it doesn't get stale. And then internally, all of the employees in the department, do annual performance plans, annual performance reviews. And this is more of a reminder to us that it's around that time of year that we would revisit those again and update them because our goals may have changed as a result of the changing adaptation plan. And then in the latter part of the year, just kind of continuing with the implementation, continuing to have some hybrid and some 100% remote options for various activities, but focusing in on reactivating some of the medium and higher risk activities. This could be, basketball inside in the gymnasium and some other things like that that are a little bit more closer contact. In-person story time where the children are actually sitting, really right there next to each other. That would be considered a medium or higher risk activity just because of the proximity. And then really looking at customer satisfaction, deploying a relatively robust set of surveys there to kind of assess customer satisfaction with the way our reactivation had gone up to that point. All of this is subject to change, but it kind of gives you an overview of sort of how we see the arc of the reactivation planning proceeding. And then just in summary, and the following calendar year, next calendar year, really has to do with the various steps of the Menlo Park Community Campus planning, initiating the operations planning. The building obviously will be under construction, so then it's really about how are we going to operate it, making sure that there's robust community engagement there, that community members are involved in that process of the type of services and programs they want to see. Really in the latter part of that calendar year, really getting to the specifics of how it may be staffed, what kind of public engagement is going to take place as we move toward opening, the furnishings, fixtures, and equipment, finalizing all of the policies and procedures for operating the new facility, all of this working with the Library Commission, with the City Council, with the community, but getting into the details there. And then at the latter part of the year, assuming the construction schedule proceeds as we currently think it will, actually beginning to wind down the interim services, which will have been in place at that point, and prepare for moving into the new facility at the end of the calendar year, starting that process, because then in 2023, it would be opening and we would be moving in. And so all of this phasing and kind of mapping it out over a 2-year period is because that's a lot of stuff to do and extremely important work. And it's going to result in some pretty amazing things, in particular the new Menlo Park Community Campus and all of the wonderful resources and benefit it's going to bring to the community. And you can have it all, just not all at once. So that's why you have to kind of phase it out like that. And then just finally, as a team for our department in particular, but thinking about the broader team that includes the Library Commission, of course, the community and the City Council, that it's only by working together that we're going to be able to achieve such a monumental shift back into some form of normal operations and then immediately pivoting to planning for a brand new facility. And it's by working together that we're going to be able to achieve that over time. So that's just a quick kind of overview of the contents of that report, sort of what the outlook is, and very happy to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, well, wow, thank you, Sean. That was a great presentation. Just going back to our protocols, are there any clarifying questions from the commission before seeing if we have any public comment? Okay, Nick, do you want to see if our member of the public has I've seen who it is, but I'm wondering if she has any questions for us
We'll go ahead and
or public comment.
open it up for public comment on this item. If you'd like to make public comment, engage that raise hand feature, and we will recognize you, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the Library Commission. And seeing no comment.
Okay, in that case, I'll open it for Library Commission discussion, if any, of this topic. Does anyone have anything they want to comment on? David, go ahead.
Yeah, quick question. And actually, I think it's Betsy Nash is on. Yeah, okay. I'm just curious, Sean, in the planning on the operational side of the new campus, we just recently spent some time, and I guess there still is additional study work going on as far as the amenities list for the sort of the Bellhaven, Menlo Park, amenities list for development. Has there been any thought to identifying if there were specific needs from from the non-structural or non-architectural aspects of the MPCC that should be added to or considered for the amenities list?
Great question. Did you have like specific ones from that list that you thought might really be applicable in the new campus?
There weren't any, and so that was more of a question. It was more of a question. Had you considered, were there things that would be potential amenities that would be would benefit the MPCC in terms of the again the non-architectural, non-structural piece of it, which is being covered by Facebook?
I mean, I think without question, taking into account what that amenities list or priorities set by council contains and how it could be expressed or addressed in the Menlo Park Community Campus is part of the operations planning. How many touch points there may be with between those two things, I'm not sure. I think that would be something we really need to look into. To be honest, nothing like jumped out because it did seem like there wasn't some things that really jumped out, but we certainly would have to look at that. I think a lot of the focus has really just been on the design of the MPCC facility, and really at this point, once that's completed and we pivot to exactly how we might use it, I think there are certainly opportunities for some innovative and creative ways to address some of those other needs. And it's in that, as well as the Parks and Recreation Facilities Master Plan. There are a few other maybe older documents that are out there, including like a previous Bellhaven visioning process that resulted in a pretty robust kind of plan. And I think we'd want to revisit all of those just to make sure we're not leaving any stones unturned.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anyone else have any comments or questions, concerns on this topic? Okay, if not, then thank you, Sean, for that presentation. And we will move on now to item C3, which is the review and update of our Library Commission agenda calendar. Nick, maybe you can put that up on the screen, share it with everyone. And once it's up there, just to streamline things, I'll ask if anybody has any clarifying questions before we see if there's any public comment on our calendar. So if you do have a clarifying question, go ahead and raise your hand. Doesn't look like we have any, but Nick, maybe you can tell me because I can't see everyone on the commission when we're sharing the screen. So I don't think we have any, but just as a general.
Nick, you're muted.
Yeah.
Pardon me, Madam Chair.
Everybody,
Sorry,
I know.
I clicked on the mute button, I swear.
Yeah, no.
I don't see any hands raised.
So I think I've probably said this before, everybody knows we can't see everyone when we have a share screen. So as opposed to raising your hand, I would say this is a great time if you do have a question or concern, just unmute and say that you need to speak, and that's probably the most efficient way. Okay, do you want to see if there's any public comment on our calendar before we open up discussion?
Sure. If any member of the public has a comment they would like to make on this item, please engage that raise hand feature on your screen and you will be recognized and unmuted. And I don't see any comment.
Okay, well then, why don't we launch into discussion if we have any, I think specifically related to March maybe, and any parking lot items, things people either want put in the parking lot or that you would like to add or subtract from the next couple months. Anybody? Again, keeping in mind our unusual circumstances. I think we're fine then to move on to agree that we're going to keep the calendar as it is right now. Nick, was there anything that we discussed or you've discussed with staff that you think needs to go on to our calendar?
Well, just pointing out that the MPCC project and also the departmental rebuilding and reactivation efforts will be standing items basically for a while.
Yeah.
So it's not like we get the one presentation tonight on rebuilding LCS. We'll be back in the coming months to give you updates and let you know how it's going and seek your input on things as we go along.
Okay. The only question that I would ask, just related to our calendar, although I know we're going to be, sorry, I know we're going to be getting to it a little bit later is the library enterprise technology system and the PLS system. And I know we've had sort of, it's been like a table tennis game back and forth with where we're going with that. So I know we're going to address it shortly, but is that something that we should be thinking about having on our calendar again in the next quarter or so? And I see that David's hand is up. So if you want to just address my question, then we can go right to David.
Sure.
I could quickly jump in on that question. I think the council made a pretty clear determination at their meeting, and I'm not sure that there would be a need to revisit the topic in future months, unless the commission really wants to. But I think maybe after tonight's item D3, if the commission wants to place it back on the agenda calendar, of course you can do that.
Okay, David, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm just curious, and maybe Sean or Nick, is there a forecast yet for reporting back to the council on commission activity? I mean, is there a need to sort of pick a meeting out there where we're going to review the status of that? Or I think the last time we talked about it, we really didn't know what the schedule was going to look like.
I think we're waiting a little bit to see how the council goal setting shakes out. And so, because you're talking about adapting your work plan in response to council priorities. So waiting until that, I think you see, I put the commission work plan review on March. It sort of slid from February to March because we're waiting to get a little more direction on where the council's going with their work plan priorities before the commission comes back together and works on adapting their work plan. And then, because that's the main thing that you are presenting when you're there to the city council, you're sort of talking about your work plan and how you've been working on your work plan. It's also a status update on what the commission's been doing to the council, but that's a major component of it. And Sean, if you wanted to add anything to that.
I think that sums it up. And another thing is just kind of agenda management for the city council. They have a lot of just really meaty items on their docket now and for the next few months. And so it's also a question of, finding the time within their calendar that makes sense for the various commissions to come forward and that they could get the time that they deserve, for that conversation. Because there's just so many other topics on the council agenda right now. So it's also a little bit of a timing issue.
Is the expectation that we would have at least a month's notice when they go back to taking commission reports so that we would have at least one meeting of our commission to discuss an update to them.
I would think so.
Absolutely.
And they haven't had any commissions yet coming back since the pandemic began to actually deliver commission reports. Isn't that right? I mean,
I
maybe
haven't seen
plan.
any commission reports. No.
Yeah, none that spring to mind. I mean, don't quote me on that. There may have been one or two, but none that I can recall.
Is there any mandate that we have to actually provide one in writing or in person per calendar year, or is it at the discretion of city council?
It's a little of both. There is like a written kind of policy that the commissions will provide that kind of update, I think upwards of a couple of times a year. But it's also somewhat at the discretion of council, as the way I recall reading the policy there. So I think that is absolutely the intention, though, for it to be a regular check-in.
Okay, thanks. David, are you satisfied with that? Did you have anything else? You're still muted.
That we won't get surprised, because it sounds like that then we're covered then. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that I see that Commissioner Kristen Leap has joined the meeting. Kristen, your hand is up. Does that mean you wanted to say something? Okay, go ahead.
So, my experience has been that they often say that they want to hear from us and then like don't follow through necessarily. So it's hard to get on their calendar, and then we get bumped with reasonable regularity as well. Has been my experience.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think I've actually given 2 presentations to council. So my experience just in the time that I've been chair is up until the start of the pandemic, which really has thrown everything awry. I was fairly satisfied with our regularity in front of them and the presentation schedule. So my hope is that sort of the dry patch between the last time that one of us presented and now is really just because the crisis has created, just havoc in all schedules. And certainly I hope we'll get in front of them soon. Okay, so
I'd say that's true. I mean, I think they want to hear from commissions and from commissioners, but they also, with as packed as their agendas have been over the past year or so, I don't think they want to call you. I don't think they want to do what Kristen was describing, which is say we're gonna ask for a report this date, and it gets pushed off and pushed off and pushed off.
Yeah.
So they want to avoid that.
I would even say that perhaps the attendance at this meeting tonight is a good sign that council is trying to see what's going on with the different commissions. So at any rate, okay, final call on anybody feeling like we need to alter our agendas, upcoming agendas at all at this point, or we can move on to the next item on our agenda. And we're screen sharing, so if anybody did have something, please. Okay, good. It looks like we're all set to move on, which is, we're at E now. Nick, every time I look at this script, I don't know if you notice it, but we always have an E right after C3, and then we jump down to D1. So
It's the perils of copying and pasting. That's mine.
So I sound like I can't read the agenda every single time.
It's
but
all on me. It's not on
everyone. No,
on
it's
me.
just a little fluke in what we're going on. Okay, so it looks like we are now at departmental updates, item D1, and Nick and Sean are going to give brief verbal updates on department activities. Did you want to do that now?
Yeah, I think I've got a couple of things to talk about. The department is going to have its first merged departmental retreat at the end of March. It'll be an all virtual retreat, a half day on a Friday, coinciding with the other half day of an in-service for the childcare team. And so we've selected, had a team get together and select a presenter and the theme. So we're looking forward to that. The planning work with the architect team and Facebook and the other city departments is going on well with the NPCC project. They are at the 50% design phase, which means they are now pestering us for things like, where do you want the electrical outlets, or rather, how much electrical do you need in different rooms, and what will the needs be for AV, and so they're trying to figure out all that stuff, power loads and things for the building. But it's exciting that it's moving along as it is. Programming has been going on swimmingly. Had some really interesting a virtual film screening over the weekend, and a filmmaker interview, I think, either tonight or tomorrow night. I'm sorry, I'll pause there. Chair, you had a question there, Katie?
I had a little question, but maybe it's not necessary. But when you're mentioning that, and you're mentioning, looking at what you might need and vision related to electrical, I'm in the middle of a home remodel myself, so I know that there are some things that are just done to code, and you're, complying with the codes. But the thing that I guess I was curious about is, given the way that this building itself is going to be transitional in so many different areas, are you taking a look at our old space needs studies and trying to anticipate what all the needs would be for different departments in each room, so that you're planning adequately for what might be the teen after school room versus what might be I'm assuming a gym would not need as many plugs as a place where we are either going to be using gaming or computers or laptops or iPads. So how is the work that was done on library assessments of what a new library should look like being factored into that?
Well, the architect team is taking all of those various studies and that we've done over the years into consideration. They're also taking into consideration how the staff anticipate using those spaces, with an eye towards this. This building is probably going to be around for 50 years at least. So trying to keep it as flexible as possible. You don't want to put VHS and Betamax in it if you know that that's going to change within the next 5 to 10 years. So trying to keep things like power, though, those will probably, I don't know, maybe we will have different ways of getting power to devices in the next 50 years. We very well might. But to the extent that we can, trying to keep the spaces flexible, not box ourselves into a corner, because it's likely that the spaces, even as they're designed now, might be used very differently in 20, 25 years. So I'm not sure if that addressed your question or not, but.
No, it does. I guess I'm just, I'm still always curious and concerned about how a library sharing space with other community programming, really how the rubber hits the road on that. And when you're planning the spaces, are the considerations related to library spaces really looking backwards on all of the work that was generated about what a community wants and needs from its library services? So, I know they're still just building the building, and a lot of this is going to take place once it's done. But when you're talking about the placement of certain necessary elements, I just wonder, are you finding that there are any, you're hitting any walls, or there's any areas of contention or problems coming up in the way that it's all laid out? I'm just curious for feedback on, it's all going swimmingly and we're great with where we're going to put things, or you're starting to encounter some difficulties that we would want to know about.
I could maybe weigh in on that. I think that's a great question. As far as like the library specific spaces in the new facility design, they are pretty well self-contained. Like there is a children's library on the first floor with its own entrances and everything. Still integrated with the building, but it is kind of its own defined space. And similarly on the second floor. As far as like the operational seamlessness, I think actually the merge of the two departments into a single operating department has gone a long way to sort of kind of put that to the side, because we really are one team now. And as we're talking through, how we will operate this building, it doesn't need to be translated between two different departments. It really is the same team. And in many cases, as we've seen during the pandemic, literally the same people crossing overs, helping with the senior center, working in the library, assisting even in the youth center and the summer camps. So I think the merger has gone a long way to kind of sort of eliminate that kind of siloing, because the silo it's now, I guess it's one big silo, but there aren't these kind of separate functions anymore. It really is one seamless team.
And adding on to that a little bit, some of the things that we heard from the community in the library space needs study weren't specifically library issues. They were talking about wanting spaces for kids to gather after school, spaces to get together for small meetings, for medium-sized meetings, for larger meetings. And those are the kinds of things that are being built into the new facility. So I think I haven't seen any sort of conflict with the design so far between staff and the design team.
Yeah, one other thing though, just to kind of talk about, is we do anticipate there being some additional community input on the operations, because I think there are some populations who, maybe not necessarily the library, but for example, the senior center was previously really, it currently is its own kind of standalone facility. And in the new facility, it will be integrated into a larger facility. All of the needs for that program exist in the facility. And there are areas that are really just explicitly for seniors and dedicated to them. But some of the other functions where, like, say in the current building, they have their own computer lab that's just in their building. Whereas in the new Menlo Park Community Campus, there will be a computer classroom function, but it may be used by others than just seniors. Other times of day, there might be other users there. And it's in, would be in maybe it's a different part of the building. It's the same building, but it's not like immediately adjacent to the senior area. So that's just like kind of one example. We're on the user side, just making sure that we have a really robust community engagement process so that we have enough eyes on it for people to maybe point out where we maybe overlooked, like how maybe a path of travel isn't as convenient here or there, or those kind of just end user kind of considerations. So I don't want to like gloss it over and say everything's going to like work super seamlessly. I think we do want to make sure that the users are engaged in the planning so as to make that as smooth as possible.
Great, thanks. And Nick, I know I kind of interrupted you. You might have been winding up. I interrupted to ask that question. So did you have any more introductory remarks or updates before we go to public comment and our discussion?
I did not, no. I was just going to talk about programming, which is still going great guns, and in fact, pulling in some really nice events. The Francisco Jimenez talk last week was really well attended, and some of the interesting things that John Weaver has been pulling in, like the sort of virtual museum visits, where they've gone to visit a marine science institute and the zoos. And so I don't know, I just find it fascinating that stuff is kind of really catching on and working really well.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I just have one update to add on a different subject, and it's the Project Read Adult Literacy Program. I know there was some interest in kind of, how are they doing? And so I wanted to report that in the calendar year 2020, there were 775 hours logged of volunteer tutoring of adults learning to read and write and speak English. That's a pretty significant decline from 2019 when the buildings were open and people were meeting in the buildings. So in 2019, that was 2,300 hours. So it declined to 775 for obvious reasons, the pandemic and everything. However, 14 of the tutor learner pairs have continued to actively meet and work together during the pandemic. And then another 5 have been meeting kind of sporadically. So that's pretty good. And that's 19 total who are still engaged, I think mostly virtually, to practice those English skills. I think in 2019, the number was closer to 35. So it's a pretty substantial drop, but there still are a number who've managed to make the pivot to virtual. So I just wanted to give you that brief update. That program's still churning away. Those folks are still getting the benefit of that connection between the tutors and learners. And but I think this is a program that really, the ability to come together in a physical space is just so key, to that kind of literacy, adult education. So looking forward to that being able to return, I think, especially for these folks.
Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, so Sean, you just loosened a screw. You just unjarred a jar in my head, and we're doing this right now in my work setting because of all the accommodations that have needed to be made in clinical trial conduct and research that relate to human volunteers. So what I'm wondering is, there have been a proliferation of interest of how are we doing relative to how are others doing? How are we acclimating and accommodating relative to, so what has established itself now as best practice and how we doing? So I was just sitting here thinking, based on all the things that you just said, I can't imagine you and your colleagues don't talk to each other within California and perhaps other states as to how you've gone about sort of dealing with community services, the kind of outreach, the educational programs, and the schools right now, I think, teachers and school unions, et cetera, are looking at, well, how are they accommodating things here? How have they? So I think there's plenty of opportunity for this, and to the point that you and others have made on this call earlier, that, for the foreseeable future, it's quite possible that we're looking at the current state of affairs going clear through to 2021, and perhaps sadly into the first portion of 2022 through the winter months, until there's clarity on high amounts of vaccination, boosting, et cetera. Are you starting to do that? Is there some way that, I think the community at large, I know people on this call, people in this community group that we're in, are interested in. I'm assuming we're doing actually really quite well, but I have no idea of knowing what's going on in other libraries and other communities like ourselves, or perhaps in more urban areas, and perhaps in the other coast. So any insights to share, and were you going in that direction anyway? And is there some shared learnings and best practices that are going to come out of this, not just for the immediate future? I think you alluded to changes that will be inevitable moving forward for years to come. Is there some way to share a little bit of insights as to what maybe you already understand relative to how we're doing? I'll shut up now.
No, that's a really great topic. And I think actually with the commission's assent, it might be good to do a little bit more robust of a treatment of that at the next meeting. Do kind of a scan of, here's what some of the other libraries, I'd say, in maybe the Bay Area, certainly San Mateo County, and kind of here's how they've been adapting. And here on the national level, here are some best practices that have kind of emerged that we want to incorporate into our reactivation plan, because because they're best practices. Just briefly, I would say you're correct. First of all, Menlo Park is by far the best library in the entire state of California, so we still have that title, which is great. It's self-awarded, but it's true. And we're actually doing pretty well compared to our peer libraries in San Mateo County, as far as really creatively doing a curbside pickup that I think does a lot more pickups than any of the other libraries. I think we average about 700 a week. The other libraries in the area, I'm hearing numbers, in the low hundreds. They're doing a couple hundred appointments a week. I just think we have a very efficient system. Certainly our books by mail, a project that we did at the beginning of the pandemic, no other libraries in San Mateo were able to pull that off. And we were able to do it. And I think there's a way that we might be able to continue to do it for seniors, people who are immune compromised or who have sort of mobility impairments. And so we're kind of working on a process to kind of do that. Because I agree, Alan, I think, sorry, Commissioner Cohen, that For many people, we'll be able to kind of get back to, you know, getting out and about and mixing with others, maybe by the end of this calendar year. But for others, it may be quite a long time, if ever, before they're ever really able to return to that. And we don't want to leave those people behind. So if you all don't mind, I think we'll want to
Yeah.
do a report out on that next month with a
Yeah,
little
that
bit
would
more
be great.
concrete.
And selfishly, you know, since I also sort of sit on the Friends of Menlo Park Libraries group, and they have really, you know, I stay up on websites like Nextdoor, and it's always frustrating to see people posting, we have 1,000 books we're trying to donate, and Menlo Park won't take them, and there's the little libraries can only fit so much, and what should I do? I think it would be really, I know I have a special asterisk and interest and selfish desire to understand, have other library systems around effectively dealt with that, and how are they able to perhaps entrain donations and not forego 2 years or more of not being able to get any of that? I have a particular interest in that as well. So if you could include that in your understandings as to how others may be doing it, and if we haven't already shared that with the principals in that group, I think that would be an enormously helpful piece of information to share with them. I've tried to come up with some ideas on my own, but you know, I'm just pulling ideas out of the sky. It would be nice to know if somebody actually came up with something similar, actually executed on it, what worked, what didn't, what were the liabilities, et cetera. So anything along those lines would be much appreciated as well. Thank you.
Super. So we'll include kind of a roundup of how volunteers, you know, kind of the Friends group is sort of part of our extended volunteer family. So that's a great point, and we'll make sure to include that in the scan. And yes, can I donate books is the #1 question I get. And I don't think any other libraries are taking them right now in the area.
Mayrin, did you want to say something? No, okay. You know, my curiosity kind of centered, Sean, when you were talking about that on the Project Read, and what, if any, logistical, no, let me stop. Is there any way that you have seen that we could maybe increase the hours while we are still remote? Is there an access problem? Is there a portal for volunteers who are looking to do something more meaningful? Is there an opportunity to lend tablets and maybe Wi-Fi access to people that might be prohibited from participating because of that? What, if anything, could we do sort of in this quarter or next, short of when there's more reopenings, to allow for that type of Project Read engagement?
You know, it's really tough, you know, in this particular case. And I would say there's a similar situation with some of the senior center services, which is just the facility with technology, the comfort with technology is just not there for some individuals. You know, it's just not part of their daily experience. And it's possible to, you know, train people and give them the technology, but it does take quite a bit, in many cases, just quite a bit of just one-to-one work with them. And when you're already separated out by the pandemic and it's through like Zoom, it just makes that even more challenging. So, you know, to the extent that, you know, they can keep in touch, like, you know, we are calling people and making sure that they don't fall off the edge of the earth or anything like that. But when it comes to actually engaging in the work of like learning how to read, there's a lot of just sort of in the place, tactile, you know, kind of hands-on, you know, two people side by side kind of work that program entails. And it's, you know, I think 19 of the pairs have, you know, kind of managed to continue it virtually. And I think that there's another dozen or so that for various reasons, it just wasn't clicking for them. And so it's difficult to kind of penetrate that barrier really that's there while the pandemic is live. But again, you know, we try to at least keep the seat warm, keep them engaged, make these opportunities available. But in some cases, you know, ultimately it's their voluntary engagement in it. that, you know, it's ultimately their decision whether or not they want to engage. It's kind of an unsatisfying response because, it's also just one of the difficult realities I think that the pandemic has kind of forced on us.
I'm wondering if, and I can certainly appreciate that there's nothing like the value. I mean, although I haven't ever tried to help an adult learn to read, I can tell you that I'm glad there was no video on me when I was trying to help my 3 children learn to read. And so I appreciate how difficult it is, even when you're face to face and you're with someone. And I think that those Project Read volunteers are extraordinary people that my hat is really off to them, utmost respect. All that said, again, just as Alan said, you will touch on something you're doing and it knocks the lid off the jar of our ideas and questions. And so while you were saying that, I guess one thing that I was really thinking about is all of these people that were counting on and benefiting from Project Read and how valuable a program it is. Have you been able to find any materials that are maybe a poorer, you know, a replacement or a substitute, but any either self-learning tools or online resources or something that there is an outreach to the people that would normally be the users of these services to say, here's an alternative that's the best we can offer as a community resource while you know, we're unable to give you our preferred method of helping you to become a better reader in our community.
Yeah, I'll take a little bit of that one. The team has actually been doing a really good job with getting sort of printed materials out to the learners. They've also kind of ramped up their English language conversation club. So that's something that works really well through Zoom, where the sort of one-on-one tutoring maybe has dropped off. The attendance at that English language conversation club has ticked up because it's more convenient for folks to attend, and they can do so from their own homes rather than having to trek down to the library or the community center to attend the conversation club. There are some online resources that the tutors and learners have access to through Project Read that they continue to use. But again, like Sean said, for some of the folks, there's, you know, when there's a problem, when people are trying to gather literacy skills, they're not always the most adept at technology. So it's kind of a dual thing. You're teaching folks technology while you're teaching them English language skills at the same time. So it hasn't really lent itself as much, that one-on-one tutoring to the Zoom era, but the English Conversation Club has been working well.
Thank you. That's great to know also. Okay, so I think I'm gonna classify the questions that Alan and I can't remember if David started us off, but I'm gonna say that those were our clarifying questions. Are there any other clarifying questions before we ask for public comment? No, okay. Then I see we still have one member of the public with us. And so why don't you see if there's any public comment on this issue?
Sure, if there's any member of the public that wants to make comment on this agenda item, just please engage that raise hand feature. And seeing none.
Okay. In that case, I know we've already touched on it a little bit. It seems to touch on this topic comes up in everything we discuss, but item D2, update Menlo Park Community Campus Project. There was a staff report that I think touched mainly on the pool, but nonetheless, would you like to give us a brief update on the MPCCE?
Sure. Just as the staff report pointed out, it's kind of a staff report of staff reports, where I'm pointing to the other two staff reports. The most recent items that the City Council took up on the MPCC project were regarding the pool design, which is interesting because the council subcommittee met as well as the full council considering those two items where they're talking about making the pool design a little more accessible for all. And also the addition of some things like a splash pad for families and trying really to wedge all of that into that space that they have available for the pool. And there are some other kind of odd mitigating factors like the PG&E property access and all sorts of things that are they're kind of trying to work around, as well as the placement of the building. So that's what those two staff reports are about, the design of the pool and how that pool area is going to be laid out. And then in the back, as I mentioned earlier, there's all this other work that's still continuing as the design team is bringing those drawings closer and closer to where they can have a working design for the building.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, anybody have a clarifying question prior to taking public comment? Okay, you want to see if we have a public comment on this item?
Sure, if there's anyone who wants to make a public comment on this item on the MPCC project update, just engage that raise hand feature. And seeing none.
All right, commissioners, any discussion on this topic? Anybody have anything they want to say? Okay, thank you then, Nick, for that. All right, D3 is an update on the potential new library enterprise technology system, and we did have a staff report on that. So Nick and or Sean, would you like to explain this to us?
Sure. So when last we heard, we were reviewing RFP submissions for a new library enterprise technology system. And I think when last we met, we were preparing to go to the city council in early February with that item. So it was sort of a two-part item that went to the city council. One was rescinding the withdrawal from the PLS system. The council had met in November, and public sentiment and the council's desire or the council's recognition that maybe the finances weren't as dire as we thought back in June or July, at least not to the extent that we would need to get the cost savings from pulling out of the PLS system. So the council decided to stay in the Peninsula Library System, and they approved that at the February 9th meeting. Secondarily, Commissioner Leap is excited about that. Secondarily, there was the staff recommendation that even though we were going to stay in the Peninsula Library System and had the ILS that comes along with that, investigating these newer systems that could do some things that our current ILS can't, that we're kind of having to work around and spackle together to do these things, books by mail and seeds by mail and library of things and these sorts of and other new initiatives. The staff recommended that we still go ahead and select the Circe Dynex product, which we thought was very reasonably priced for what we were getting over the 5-year period. Council had a good discussion about that, decided not to approve that purchase. I think, and I won't, it's hard to characterize the entire council's reason for that, but I think the themes that I heard were, really wanting to make sure that we looked at the IT master plan for the city as a whole and how that new technology would fit in with that IT master plan, because the library enterprise technology was not considered part of the IT master plan. And then also looking ahead to the new MPCC and trying to make sure that whatever system we did select would be able to be integrated into that new facility, because there were things that we were looking for that new technology platform to do for us that were more sort of non-traditional library things like meeting room management and space management and things like that. Sean, did I leave anything out there?
I think that was just a great overview. Thank you for that. And I just, really was grateful for the discussion by the city council, the attention to this kind of nitty gritty detail of the operations. And it's a relief that, our financial circumstances weren't quite as bad as to actually pull the trigger on withdrawing from PLS quite so abruptly. Now that said, one of the reasons why it was sort of put up in the first place was because as the responses to the RFP showed, there are more cost-effective systems out there. There's pros and cons. There's certainly trade-offs, but certainly because the underlying infrastructure that supports the PLS system, it really hadn't been revisited or updated in 20 plus years. Technology moves pretty far in 20 years. One upshot of it is that the PLS is basically a consortium of all the various jurisdictions, and the board, if you will, is comprised of all the library directors. And there is a paid executive director and staff that kind of manage the tech side there up in an office in San Mateo. But it did prompt a conversation about maybe PLS as a system really needs to look at our underlying technology infrastructure, because clearly there are some things that maybe we could consider updating and making more efficient for all of the library users, and particularly when it comes to online access and some of the new models that the pandemic has really kind of either prompted or kind of accelerated. And so I just think the city council's willingness to really say, hey, let's explore this other option for a 6-month period, which is what they did. It prompted, I think, a very healthy conversation about, what does the future of PLS look like, and how do all of us get together and look at the technology that's there and maybe take steps to improve it for the benefit of all, and maybe also achieve some cost savings system-wide, since clearly there's some other options out there that, that might be able to achieve that. So it was all, I think, really worth doing. And I think there's some really good conversations that are still to be had, as a result of it. So with that, I think I'll stop there. But that's sort of, I think, some of my takeaways from it, and what I see as sort of some of the outcomes that, may actually still yield for us.
Yeah, and just to tag on a little more, I think what I got from the discussion wasn't that the council was saying no to an enterprise technology upgrade. I think they were saying not now, was sort of the point that I got out of it.
Okay, and does anyone have any clarifying questions that they'd like to ask? Comments? I actually had a couple. I talked to someone, a Menlo Park resident this week, who was asking me about this and trying to make sense of it, and really stretch my understanding of how much I had retained from our meetings and what I knew about the PLS. And first of all, I'm glad that we didn't have to yank from something abruptly because we just can't afford it. So first, that is a good thing, and I agree with you. Secondly, my recollection from when we all spoke, and then going back and looking at some of this stuff, is that it is a very expensive, antiquated system, from what I recall you telling us. And please, if my memory is characterizing this in a way that you didn't tell us, I would love to be straightened out on this. But my recollection was that you were really proponents of saying, this is an antiquated, expensive system that doesn't serve our needs really as well as it should. It doesn't make sense for us. So I think I heard this, but I'd like to be clear that there probably are much better systems, much less expensive. The maybe little bit that we would lose as a result of leaving this do not outweigh all the things that we would get for less somewhere else. And are you thinking that the future for us, once this contract expires, really is to move to something else, with time baked in perhaps to educate the Menlo Park Library users about where we would be going. So it didn't seem, to upend their apple carts a little bit when we shift.
I think everything you characterized there, Madam Chair, is accurate. I think there's another just sort of aspect to it, though, which is the community's familiarity with that system. There's definitely a great affinity for working together as a county to share library materials. Even though, maybe in Menlo Park, we actually loan more materials out than we actually borrow from others. I think it's that spirit that, I think we heard from a number of community members, that they, they appreciate that. And I think, ultimately our city council said, it's worth preserving that and understanding that there is a cost differential, but understanding that also, there's a fair amount of technical support that comes along with membership and PLS. So, I don't want to characterize it as like a totally bad deal for Menlo Park. It isn't that. It's more that the challenge of getting the technology, to be upgraded and to kind of, move into 2021, it was very difficult on that system-wide level. However, there does seem to be the beginnings of a conversation about that, and it could potentially be the best of both worlds, and that retaining that kind of joint powers kind of arrangement while also prompting, and it will take some time, an overhaul of the underlying information technology working within the system. And I think that was sort of the direction, if not explicitly stated by the council, but that the council had a desire to, really not make that kind of a massive move right now. If the system's good enough, we can revisit, maybe at a future time if there's some tweaks that might be made, but a desire to kind of stay in the system, kind of close the books on that for now and move on to some other things. But just so, the commission's aware, that conversation has started among the PLS directors and the staff that, what, we need to kind of figure out a way to maybe upgrade this system from within the system. So I hope that kind of helps answer your question, because it isn't to say to cast aside those deficiencies in the outdated nature. I think that still exists, but now looks like there's maybe a different path has opened up to maybe start to resolve them.
No, I appreciate that. And certainly I think it's wonderful that we are good neighbors to those around us. And I do recall you telling us that we actually gave much more than we got from that in terms of lending. And I think I recall, and again, my memory isn't what it used to be, that there was talk of we might, for what little we borrowed from it, we might be able to buy those books and then have them in our collection going forward, anything that someone would be looking for. I see one or two nods, which make me think other people remember that again. And, I don't have a strong position on this one way or another, and maybe I'm going on about it a little bit too long, but my concern is only that as a commission, I know that we voted in favor of this proposition to say, yeah, we want council to know that we've reviewed it carefully and we, think that this is a good step. And so I don't take it as a rebuke. I don't take it as anything that's negative, but as a vehicle for helping the rest of Menlo Park understand what's going on, I had to admit that I have a little confusion about this whole PLS enterprise, and us talking about letting go of it and us authorizing, our stamp of approval of letting go of it. And now maybe we're not, and maybe it'll be remedied so that we want to stay in it. And those can all be good things. So they're not negatives, but I know that there's some confusion out there, sort of the back and forth of this a little. And so I thought it was worth hearing that a little bit in detail during our meeting tonight.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. That is very helpful. And I'll just add one thing, which is that it is an incredibly technical and complex question. And, I think for the everyday library user, it's all this invisible stuff that happens, and it's not necessarily front of mind for community members, which is perfectly understandable. And I think in order to get that level of technical, the comprehension of the technical there, it may actually exceed the interest level of probably most casual library users. Well, understandably so,
All right, I'm sorry, Nick, I don't recall. Did we already ask for public comment on this? If there is a public comment related to this item?
We didn't, and we can, if there is any public comment that anyone would like to make on this particular item on the library enterprise software update, just engage that raise hand feature at this time. And seeing none.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have anything else you want to add on it? If not, I think we are good to move on to the next item on the agenda. Okay, so let's move on. And this is advisory body member reports. Any reports from library commission members since the last meeting? Okay, I don't see anyone else. I actually just have a couple items that I wanted to bring to your attention. One is, as you know, I'm a member of the Library Foundation. So the Library Foundation did have, I think, we have our board meetings, and then we also have working meetings. So I've been at some meetings since last we all met. And just to let you know that the Library Foundation at this point is still looking inward a little and looking at ways to expand its board and also its outreach into the community. And so I'll be able to give you more information as that develops. But if you do have an interest in knowing more about the foundation or someone you think that might want to be involved in it, I'd love to know about it. And I might have some more specific talking points to tell you about at the next meeting. So the Library Foundation is moving forward with hopefully the ability to really engage and help raise money for the new build. And then secondly, it's that time of year again where the city is opening up for applications for commissions. And you probably, since we all are commissioners, we're all familiar with that process and how it works. Many of the commissions for Menlo Park have openings, and our own commission has a couple openings now. And so, just to do our part, I wanted to remind you that the deadline for applications, I believe, is April 14th. And since we do have 2 openings, chat with your neighbors. I would love to, because we're building something in Bellhaven, I think it would be really terrific if we had even more Bellhaven residents on our commission. But, I'm personally talking to people and answering questions, maybe tapping people I think might be more interested in. And if you wanted to do that as well. And, for what it's worth, I'm willing to talk to anybody that's interested in being on the Library Commission. So if you do know somebody who's interested and maybe wants another person's opinion beyond just yours, you could give them my email or cell phone, and I'd be happy to talk to them. So those are my only 2 points of talking points. Anybody else? Final call? And if not, I think we're ready to adjourn the meeting. So thank you to our public member of the public who tuned in. I definitely appreciate having
There
you.
were a couple of
drop in.
other people who popped in and out
They
during the meeting.
absolutely did. And I think I've just learned in tonight's meeting how to see who our attendees are if they identify themselves. So I think we had altogether 3 people who 2 of them came and one went and one stayed steady the whole time, but very welcome to be here. So that's it. I hope you all have a great month, and we'll see you next month. Thank you. And the meeting is officially adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.
night.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, guys.